Tonight, we delve into a story that peels back the gilded veneer of high society to reveal the brutal truths underneath. It's a tale set against the glittering backdrop of the annual Starlight Foundation Gala, the most exclusive event of the New York philanthropic season. We follow Rebecca Picos, a woman celebrated for her grace and her husband's immense success. But when the woman she suspects is her husband's mistress, a rising star in his own company, publicly humiliates her and has her thrown out of her own event, the night takes a turn no one could have predicted. This isn't a story about a woman scorned. It's about a queen reclaiming her throne not with tears, but with a meticulously planned detonation of secrets on the grandest stage imaginable. Stay tuned, because the fallout is spectacular. The air in the penthouse on Park Avenue was a carefully curated silence, the kind that costs a fortune to maintain. It was the sound of triple-paned glass defeating the roar of Manhattan, of cashmere socks sinking into silk rugs of a life insulated from the harsh realities of the world below. Rebecca Picos stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a flute of untouched champagne in her hand, watching the city lights ignite like a carpet of fallen stars. To anyone looking in, she was the epitome of success, the elegant wife of Walter Picos, the CEO and founder of the financial tech behemoth Picos Capital. Their life was a masterpiece of public relations. They were the power couple, gracing the covers of Forbes and Vanity Fair, their narrative one of mutual support and ambition. Walter was the visionary, the ruthless innovator who could predict market trends with unnerving accuracy. Rebecca was his anchor, the sophisticated partner who chaired charities, hosted flawless dinner parties for investors, and possessed a quiet intelligence that many mistook for passivity. She was the one who remembered the names of their clients' children, who sent thoughtful gifts, who smoothed the egos her husband inevitably bruised on his ascent to the top. She was in every sense the co-architect of their empire. Tonight was the pinnacle of their social calendar, the Starlight Foundation Gala, an event raising money for underprivileged youth programs. More than that, it was an event Rebecca had personally co-chaired for the past 5 years. She had bled for this gala, spending months negotiating with vendors, courting donors, and meticulously planning every detail from the exact shade of the floral arrangements to the complex seating chart that navigated the treacherous waters of New York's elite. "Rebecca, are you ready?" Walter's voice, smooth and commanding, cut through her thoughts. She turned. He stood in the doorway of their master suite, adjusting the cuffs of his Tom Ford tuxedo. At 45, he was strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes and a confident posture that seemed to suck the oxygen from a room. But lately, when those eyes looked at her, Rebecca felt a chill. The warmth that had once been there was gone, replaced by a polite, almost professional distance. "Almost," she replied, her voice a soft melody. She was wearing a deep emerald gown by Oscar de la Renta that clung to her silhouette, her auburn hair styled in elegant waves, a set of diamond and emerald earrings, a 10th anniversary gift from Walter, glittered at her ears. They felt heavier than usual tonight. He walked over, his gaze sweeping over her with an appraising look, the way he might inspect a corporate acquisition. "You look perfect. The board members from the European hedge fund are flying in for this. I need tonight to be seamless." "It always is," she said, a hint of steel beneath the velvet of her tone. It was a gentle reminder that the seamlessness he demanded was born from her labor. He didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he checked his Patek Philippe watch. "The car is waiting. Cassandra is meeting us at the venue to run through the presentation schedule one last time." Cassandra. The name hung in the air between them, acrid and unspoken. Cassandra Riley. 28 years old, whip-smart, raven-haired, and impossibly ambitious. She had joined Pecos Capital 3 years ago as a junior analyst and had rocketed up the ranks to become the head of communications. Her ascent was unprecedented, and Walter championed her at every turn, calling her his protégé. Rebecca had watched their relationship with a growing sense of dread. It started with late nights at the office, which Walter excused as strategy sessions. Then came the business trips they took together, from which he returned smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, Chanel Num. 5. A scent far too classic and bold for the youthful Cassandra. Rebecca knew Cassandra wore something more modern, something sharper. She knew because she'd smelled it on Walter's suit jacket one evening. The little signs had become an avalanche. The way he guarded his phone, angling it away from her. The private jokes and knowing glances they shared at company events, creating an invisible circle that excluded her. He called it mentorship. Rebecca, a student of human behavior, called it by its real name, an affair. She hadn't confronted him. Not yet. A confrontation without a strategy was just noise, and Rebecca Pecos was not a woman who made noise. She made moves. For the last 6 months, she had been quietly observing, gathering information, and preparing for a war. She prayed she would never have to fight. Of course, Rebecca said, her smile never faltering. Cassandra is so dedicated. It's wonderful that you're giving her such a significant role. Walter beamed, completely missing the double meaning. She's a killer. Reminds me of myself at that age. She's got the hunger. Yes, Rebecca thought she certainly does. As they rode down in the private elevator, the silence stretched thick with things unsaid. Walter was scrolling through his phone, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips. He was probably texting her. Rebecca stared at her own reflection in the mirrored walls. The woman looking back at her was poised, beautiful and composed. But in her eyes, a storm was gathering. She was the co-chair of this gala, the queen of this evening's festivities. Yet she felt like a guest in her own life, an inconvenient footnote in the new chapter her husband was so eagerly writing. Tonight she had a feeling the carefully constructed facade of the Pecos Empire was about to show its first crack. And she had no idea it would be Cassandra Riley herself who would hand her the hammer. Rebecca's suspicion had not been a sudden dramatic epiphany. It was a slow, creeping poison that had seeped into the foundations of her marriage over the last year. It began with the little things, the discordant notes in the symphony of their perfect life. The first tangible clue had appeared 6 months ago, while sorting through laundry, a task she still insisted on doing herself. Finding a strange comfort in the domestic ritual, a single delicate gold earring fell from the pocket of one of Walter's business shirts. It wasn't hers. It was a small, modern hoop, the kind of thing a younger woman would wear. When she presented it to him, he'd waved it away dismissively. Must be from the dry cleaner. You know how things get mixed up. He'd tossed it into the trash without a second thought, his casualness a little too practiced, a little too smooth. Rebecca had quietly retrieved it later, placing it in a small velvet box in the back of her jewelry case. She called it her evidence box. Soon the box began to fill. There was the receipt from a restaurant in Soho Balthazar for a table for 2 on a night he was supposedly working late with his legal team. There was the credit card statement with a charge for a suite at the Greenwich Hotel on a weekend he was allegedly on a solo business trip to Chicago. She cross-referenced his flight records through the company's travel portal, to which she still had administrative access from her early days helping him set up the business. There was no flight to Chicago. Her investigation became methodical, a silent secondary job she performed in the late hours of the night when Walter was asleep, or more often, working. She was no stranger to corporate infrastructure. In the first 5 years of their marriage, before Picos Capital became a giant, she had been its unpaid chief operating officer. She had designed the company's filing systems, managed its books, and built its client database. She knew the architecture of her husband's life because she had helped build it, and she knew where to find the weaknesses. The true breakthrough came from a place of digital carelessness. Walter, for all his technological genius, had a blind spot when it came to personal digital hygiene. Their home network, his cloud accounts, his laptop. They were all interconnected, a web of convenience she had set up for them years ago. One evening, while searching for a tax document on their shared cloud drive, she stumbled upon a folder he had mis-synced from his work account. It was innocuously named Project Nightingale. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Project Nightingale was the code name for a new, highly confidential algorithmic trading platform they were developing. Walter had told her it was the future of the company. But as she clicked open the folder, she found it wasn't filled with code or market analysis. It was filled with him and Cassandra. There were photos, the two of them laughing over wine on a balcony that looked suspiciously like the suite at the Greenwich Hotel. A selfie of them on a ski lift, snow-capped mountains behind them on a weekend he was supposed to be at a tech conference in Denver. There were documents, too. Scans of flight itineraries and hotel confirmations for two, all booked under a corporate expense account. He was using company money to fund his affair. But the most damning file was a short audio memo, likely recorded by accident. It was just 30 seconds of muffled sound, but it was enough. She could hear Cassandra's breathy laugh, followed by her voice dripping with ambition. "And what about Rebecca? When are you going to tell her it's over? This whole charade is getting exhausting, Johnny." Johnny. No one called him Johnny. Then Walter's voice, low and conspiratorial. "Patience, Cass. The gala is in 2 weeks. It's her last big project. After that, I'll handle it. We just need to get through this, and then everything we've planned for can begin. The board loves you. You're the future of this company. She's the past." Rebecca had felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just a fling. It was a coup. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning her obsolescence. She was being phased out of her own life like an outdated piece of software. Her gala was meant to be her swan song before she was unceremoniously discarded. The rage that filled her was cold and sharp, a shard of ice in her chest. The hurt was there, a deep, cavernous ache, but the anger was a more powerful, more motivating force. She didn't cry. She began to plan. She copied the entire Project Nightingale folder onto an encrypted USB drive, a small, sleek silver stick that she hid within the lining of a vintage Chanel handbag she never used. Then she made a phone call. Not to a divorce lawyer, not yet. She called a private investigator, a discreet professional named Peterson. She'd been recommended by a friend who had gone through a similarly messy high society divorce. "I don't need you to find out if my husband is having an affair," she told him over a burner phone she'd purchased with cash. "I know he is. I need you to find out everything about her. Cassandra Riley. Where she invests her money, who her friends are, what her debts are, what her ambitions are. I also need you to document every instance my husband uses corporate assets for personal reasons. I want a full accounting." Over the next 2 weeks, as she finalized menus and confirmed RSVPs for the gala, Peterson's reports trickled in. They painted a picture of Cassandra as a woman deeply in debt from student loans and a lavish lifestyle she couldn't afford, desperate to solidify her position. More importantly, they provided a detailed log of Walter and Cassandra's expenses, all billed to Picos Capital dinners at per se weekends in the Hamptons. Even a Cartier bracelet Walter had bought her, listed under client relations. Rebecca felt no satisfaction, only a hardening resolve. Walter had underestimated her. They both had. They saw her as a decorative piece, an elegant hostess. They had forgotten she had a mind like a steel trap, and the resilience of a woman who had clawed her way up from a middle-class background right alongside her husband. As she zipped up her emerald gown on the night of the gala, she tucked the small silver USB drive into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of her clutch. She didn't know exactly how the night would end, but she knew one thing for certain. They had written a script where she was the victim, the discarded wife exiting stage left. But tonight, Rebecca Picos was going to write her own ending. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a breathtaking sea of shimmering gowns, black ties, and the clinking of crystal glasses. A string quartet played softly in the corner as New York's most powerful figures mingled under the magnificent chandeliers. Rebecca moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, a queen in her court. She greeted a senator, shared a laugh with a tech billionaire, and complimented the wife of a hedge fund manager on her necklace. On the surface, she was the perfect hostess, the embodiment of elegance and calm. But beneath the Oscar de la Renta, her nerves were pulled taut as piano wire. She saw them across the room. Walter stood with a circle of investors, a confident smile on his face. Beside him, Cassandra Riley was a vision in a stark white, backless gown by Tom Ford, a deliberate and audacious choice that stood out against the jewel tones of the other women. She was holding court, gesturing with an animated flair, looking every bit the part of the company's dynamic new face. At one point, her hand rested on Walter's arm for a fraction of a second too long, a possessive territorial gesture that sent a fresh wave of ice through Rebecca's veins. Rebecca had spent the first hour ensuring everything was perfect. The catering was flawless, the donors were happy, and the press was capturing it all. She had fulfilled her duty. Now it was time. She needed a moment to herself to breathe before whatever came next. She made her way toward the ladies' powder room, a lavish lounge area with velvet settees and antique vanities. As she was about to push the door open, a sharp voice called her name. Rebecca. She turned. Cassandra was standing there, her expression a cool mask of superiority. Her arms were crossed, and a smug little smile played on her lips. She had followed her. Cassandra, Rebecca said, her voice even. Is there something you need? I think the question is what you need. Cassandra began, taking a step closer. Her voice was low, meant only for the two of them. And it's a reality check. You need to understand that your role here is over. Rebecca felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline. It was happening. The confrontation she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times was finally here. My role, I'm the co-chair of this event, Cassandra. I believe my role is quite clear. Cassandra let out a short, pitying laugh. Oh, Rebecca. Still playing the part. It's almost sad. This gala, this life, it's a legacy account. You're the outgoing model. I'm the upgrade. She gestured back toward the ballroom, toward Walter. He's with me now, in every way that matters. The company, the future. It's ours. Every word was a carefully sharpened dart aimed to inflict maximum pain. Rebecca remained still, her face an unreadable portrait of composure. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. Is Walter aware that his head of communications is behaving like a character in a cheap melodrama? Rebecca asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Cassandra's smile tightened. Walter is aware of everything. In fact, she glanced over her shoulder. On cue, Walter emerged from the ballroom and walked toward them, his face a grim, determined mask. The investors were gone. It was just the three of them in the gilded hallway. "What's going on here?" Walter asked, though his eyes fixed on Rebecca. Told her he knew exactly what was going on. This was a planned ambush. "I was just telling Rebecca that it's time for her to go home," Cassandra said, sidling up to Walter, linking her arm through his. It was a blatant public declaration. Rebecca looked at her husband, the man she had loved, built a life with, and trusted. His face was cold, impassive. He was a stranger. "Is this true?" "Walter, are you asking me to leave my own event?" He had the decency to hesitate, a flicker of something shame perhaps crossing his features. But then he looked at Cassandra, who gave his arm a slight encouraging squeeze, and his expression hardened again. "It's for the best, Rebecca," he said, his voice low and firm. "You're not well. You're emotional. It's better if you just go home quietly. Don't make a scene." Don't make a scene. The phrase echoed in her mind, a textbook line from the gaslighter's handbook. He was trying to frame her as unstable hysterical, while he and his mistress stood there the picture of rational control. The humiliation was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. People were starting to notice them now, casting curious glances from the ballroom entrance. The whispers were beginning. The wife, the husband, the mistress. A tale as old as time played out under the opulent chandeliers of the plaza. "I see," Rebecca said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked from her husband's cold face to Cassandra's triumphant one. This was their victory moment. They believed they had won. They had cornered her publicly, shamed her, and were now casting her out. With a final withering look at them both, Rebecca turned. She did not run. She did not cry. She walked away with her head held high, each step a deliberate, measured beat. She could feel their smug stares on her back, could almost hear their shared sigh of relief. They thought she was retreating in defeat. They thought they had successfully ejected the inconvenient wife from the narrative. As she passed the security chief by the main entrance, a man named Frank, whom she had known for years. Walter spoke into his earpiece. Frank glanced at her, his expression a mixture of pity and confusion. He didn't move to stop her. She was, after all, Mrs. Picos. She walked out of the grand doors and into the cool night air, the sounds of the Gala fading behind her. She was out. She was humiliated. She was alone. And everything was going exactly according to plan. The ride back to the Park Avenue penthouse was silent. The driver, a man who had been with them for years, kept his eyes fixed on the road, sensing the palpable tension emanating from the back seat, even with Rebecca as the sole passenger. She didn't weep. The time for tears was long past, burned away by the cold, clarifying fire of betrayal. Her mind was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, every thought sharp and focused. "You're not well. You're emotional." Walter's words replayed in her head, not as an insult, but as a tactical analysis. He wanted her to be a hysterical woman, to go home and shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. He and Cassandra were probably back in the ballroom now, basking in their triumph, believing she was curled up in bed, destroyed. They had underestimated her resilience, her intellect, and most of all, her rage. As soon as she stepped into the silent penthouse, she kicked off her heels. The emerald Oscar de la Renta gown felt like a costume from a different life. She unzipped it, letting it pool on the floor, and walked into her dressing room. She didn't change into silk pajamas or a comforting robe. She changed into battle armor, a tailored black pantsuit by Armani, a simple silk shell, and a pair of low, practical pumps. She pulled her hair back into a severe tight chignon. The woman in the mirror was no longer the graceful hostess. She was a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover. Her first move was to open her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced speed. She opened a secure email account and sent a single pre-written message with the subject line, "Green light." The recipient was Ms. Albright, the fiercest divorce attorney in New York, whom Rebecca had secretly retained a month ago. The email contained a link to a secure server where Rebecca had uploaded scans of every piece of evidence. She had the receipts, the hotel bills, the photos from Project Nightingale, and Peterson's entire dossier on Cassandra and Walter's misuse of corporate funds. Attached was a simple instruction: file at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. No exceptions, no negotiations. Next, she made a phone call. "Ben, it's Rebecca Picos." Ben Carter was the head of the audio-visual team for the Gala, a freelancer she had personally hired and worked with for years. She had always treated him with respect and paid him handsomely, earning his loyalty. "Mrs. Picos, is everything all right? I saw you leave. I hope nothing is wrong." "Everything is about to be made right, Ben," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I need a favor, a big one. There's a presentation I need you to queue up. It's unconventional, and it's not on the official schedule." "Unconventional how?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity. "There's a USB drive in the top inner pocket of my clutch which I left on my seat at table 1. It's a small silver stick. I need you to retrieve it discreetly. No one can see you. The drive is encrypted. The password is Icarus 2025. "Icarus," Ben repeated. "Okay." The drive contains a single presentation file named Picos Capital Integrity Audit, Final. I need you to override the scheduled tribute video that's supposed to play after the main auction. You will play my file instead. It needs to be projected onto all 3 main screens. Can you do that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ben was smart. He knew this was something explosive. "Mrs. Picos, it sounds like a breach of protocol, I know," she cut in smoothly. "But Walter and the communications head have approved a last-minute change to the program. They wanted it to be a surprise. The request is coming directly from the top. And Ben," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "your invoice for tonight will include a significant discretionary bonus for your team's flexibility and professionalism. Let's call it a 5-figure bonus." That sealed it. Loyalty was one thing. Loyalty combined with a life-changing amount of money was another entirely. "Consider it done, Mrs. Picos," Ben said, his voice now firm. "I'll handle it personally. Icarus 2025. Got it." "Thank you, Ben. I won't forget this." She hung up and took a deep, steadying breath. The pieces were in motion. The legal assault was armed and ready. The public detonation was queued up. Now there was only one thing left to do. She walked into Walter's immaculate home office, a space of polished mahogany and black leather. She went to his desk and turned on his computer. Her own thumbprint gave her immediate access, another detail from their intertwined past he had forgotten to erase. She navigated to the corporate server to the board of directors contact list. She drafted a concise professional email. Subject urgent. Board communication, Re Picos Capital. To the esteemed members of the board. An event of critical importance concerning the leadership and ethical standing of Picos Capital will be taking place this evening at the Starlight Foundation Gala, approximately at 10:30 p.m. EST. I strongly advise you to watch the live stream of the event, which is available on the Foundation's website. A matter of severe corporate malfeasance and reputational risk will be addressed. Full documentation will be forwarded to your legal counsel tomorrow morning. Sincerely, Rebecca Picos. She hit send, dispatching the message to the 12 most powerful people in Walter's professional life. They would see it. Their phones would buzz. They would be curious. They would watch. Finally, she stood up and walked back to her dressing room. She picked up the emerald earrings from her vanity, the 10th anniversary gift, and let them rest in her palm. They were beautiful, but they felt like shackles. She placed them back in their box, closed the lid, and pushed it to the back of the drawer. She checked her watch. It was 10:15 p.m. The main auction would be ending soon. It was time. She picked up her car keys, walked out of the penthouse without a backward glance, and headed back to the plaza. Not as the victim, not as the wife, but as the reckoning. The journey back to the plaza was a blur of city lights streaking past the car windows. Rebecca drove herself this time, her hands steady on the wheel of her own Range Rover. She felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. There was no fear, no hesitation. There was only the singular focus of a predator closing in on its prey. She had been publicly wounded, and now she was returning to the scene, not to lick her wounds, but to burn the whole forest down. She didn't use the grand main entrance. She used a service entry on the side, flashing a vendor pass she still had from the event setup. The security guards knew her and nodded her through without question. She navigated the labyrinthine back hallways of the hotel, her pumps clicking softly on the linoleum floors, a stark contrast to the muffled elegance of the ballroom on the other side of the walls. She found Ben near the AV control booth, tucked away behind a black curtain at the back of the ballroom. He was pale, his eyes wide. "Mrs. Picos," he whispered, looking nervously over his shoulder. "I have it. It's loaded and ready to go." "Did anyone see you?" "No. I told my team I was running a final diagnostic. The password worked. I've seen the first few slides, Mrs. Picos. Are you sure about this?" She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Ben. Just have it ready. On my cue." "What is the cue? You'll know," she said with a small, grim smile. She slipped away from the booth and found a position in the shadows near a service doorway that led into the main ballroom. From her vantage point, she had a clear view of the stage, and more importantly, of Table 1, the premier table at the front. There they were, Walter and Cassandra. They were laughing, radiant with victory. He had his arm draped casually over the back of her chair. She was leaning into him, whispering in his ear. They were drinking champagne, accepting congratulations from table hoppers for a successful evening. They looked utterly untouchable, the new king and queen of their empire, celebrating the successful exile of the old monarch. The sight of them so confident in her defeat solidified any lingering trace of doubt in her mind. On stage, the auctioneer was wrapping up having just sold a week on a private yacht for a staggering sum. The master of ceremonies, a well-known news anchor, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, what an incredible night of generosity," he boomed. "And now, before our final performance, we have a short tribute video to honor the tireless work of our Gala co-chair, a woman whose passion has been the driving force behind the Starlight Foundation for 5 years. Rebecca watched Walter's face. He smiled politely, a magnanimous gesture toward his supposedly vanquished wife. He probably assumed it was a standard pre-recorded video of her talking about charity work. He raised his glass in a mock toast, a final insult. Cassandra smirked. The MC continued, "A woman of grace, intelligence, and unparalleled dedication. Please direct your attention to the screens for a tribute to Mrs. Rebecca Picos." The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. The 3 massive screens above the stage, which had been displaying the foundation's logo, flickered to black. This was it. But instead of a video starting, the stage lights shifted. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, landing not on the screens, but on the side of the stage. And into that spotlight from the shadows walked Rebecca. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a ripple of pure shock that quickly grew into a wave of confused murmurs. People craned their necks, whispering. Was this part of the show? Rebecca saw Walter's face go slack with disbelief. The champagne glass in his hand froze halfway to his lips. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of utter confusion. Beside him, Cassandra's face drained of all color. Her triumphant smirk dissolved into a gape of horror. They looked like statues frozen in their moment of celebration as the ghost they thought they had vanquished materialized before the entire world. She walked calmly to the podium at the center of the stage. The MC, looking utterly bewildered, took a step back, unsure of what to do. Rebecca reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of stunned faces. Her eyes scanned the room until they locked with Walter's. She held his gaze for a long, silent moment, letting the full weight of her presence sink in. The message was clear. You thought I was gone. You were wrong. The murmuring in the room died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Every eye was on her. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew it was important. Rebecca took a slow, deliberate breath and leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear, calm, and carrying to every corner of the magnificent ballroom. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. The originally scheduled tribute video isn't going to play. Instead, I thought I'd give a short presentation myself. You can consider it a case study on the importance of integrity, both personal and corporate." Behind her, on her cue to Ben, the 3 giant screens flickered to life. They didn't show a video. They showed a single, stark white slide with a title in bold black letters that would seal her husband's fate. Davenport Capital. An audit of moral bankruptcy. A tremor of shock went through the ballroom. The title slide, displayed 3 times over, in massive stark lettering, was an audacious declaration of war. It was corporate, professional, and utterly damning. Walter Picos, who had just been holding court as a titan of industry, was now the subject of a public audit conducted by his own wife. His face was a ghastly shade of pale, his mouth slightly agape as he stared at the screens. Then at Rebecca, a look of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. Cassandra looked like she was about to be physically ill. She had shrunk in her chair, trying to make herself invisible. But there was nowhere to hide. Rebecca stood at the podium, a figure of icy composure. She held a small remote in her hand, and with a quiet click, she advanced to the next slide. "Good evening," she began again, her voice resonating with newfound power. For years I have stood on this stage and spoken about the importance of giving our youth the tools for a better future, honesty, transparency, and integrity. Tonight, I want to discuss what happens when those values are abandoned by those at the very top. Let's use Picos Capital as our example. The slide changed. It showed a high-resolution photograph of the Cartier bracelet Walter had bought for Cassandra. Next to it was the corporate expense report with the item line, Client Relations Gift, European Consortium, highlighted in red. Item number 1, misappropriation of corporate funds. Rebecca announced her tone as level as if she were presenting a quarterly report. This bracelet, a lovely piece from Cartier, was purchased for Ms. Cassandra Riley, our head of communications. It was, however, billed to the company as a gift to a client who I have confirmed never received it. This is not just poor judgment. It is fraud. Gasps rippled through the audience. The high society crowd, initially just titillated by the drama, was now beginning to understand the gravity of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a marital spat. It was a public accusation of corporate crime. Click. The next slide appeared. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left, an official company itinerary for a business trip to Aspen for Walter. On the right, a photograph she had found in Project Nightingale, Walter and Cassandra, arm in arm, on a ski slope, grinning. Below it was the folio from the Little Nell Hotel, a single suite with champagne service and couples massages, all charged to the Picos Capital corporate account. Item number 2. Falsification of business travel. Rebecca continued, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. Company resources, including the corporate jet, were used for personal excursions under the guise of official business. This not only constitutes theft from the company and its shareholders, but it also paints a picture of a profound ethical rot at the core of the executive suite. She paused, letting the information sink in. She could see board members in the audience pulling out their phones, their faces grim. The news anchor, who had been MC, was now standing in the wings, speaking urgently into his phone to his news desk. This was no longer a social event. It was breaking news. But the deepest corruption, Rebecca said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, is not financial. It's the corruption of trust, the decay of decency. Click. The screen was now filled with text messages, their timestamps clearly visible. Screenshots from Walter's phone, which had been synced to their home computer. Walter. She's planning the gala. Completely oblivious. It's almost sad. Cassandra, let her have her little party. It's the last thing she'll ever control. After that, it's our turn, Johnny. Walter. The board already loves you. I've been paving the way. Once she's gone, I'll announce your promotion to COO. You're the future. The word Johnny on the giant screen was a particular cruelty. It was their secret, now laid bare for the world to see. Rebecca didn't need to editorialize. The texts spoke for themselves. They revealed not just an affair, but a cold, calculated conspiracy to oust her and manipulate the company's board. Then came the final brutal blow. Many of you know my background is not in finance, but in contract law, Rebecca said, looking directly at Walter now. He seemed paralyzed, unable to move or speak. When I helped Walter draft the initial bylaws for Picos Capital, I insisted on including a specific clause in the executive employment contracts. It's often called a morality clause. It states that any executive found to be engaged in conduct that brings the company into public disrepute or who is proven to have engaged in gross misconduct, including the misuse of company assets, is subject to immediate termination for cause, forfeiting all bonuses, all stock options, and all severance. She clicked to the final slide. It was a scanned image of that exact clause from Walter's own employment, contract, his signature clearly visible at the bottom. By his own actions and by the terms of the contract, he signed the CEO of Picos Capital has terminated his own employment, Rebecca declared, and as head of communications, who was complicit in this fraud and conspiracy, so has Miss Riley. She let that statement hang in the dead silent room for a full 10 seconds. It was a masterful checkmate. She hadn't just exposed his affair. She had used his own corporate governance against him to strip him of his power and his fortune in one fell swoop. The Starlight Foundation is about building a better future, she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction, and that future must be built on a foundation of truth. Thank you for your time. With that, she placed the remote down on the podium, turned away from the petrified figures of Walter and Cassandra, and walked off the stage. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sound that filled the room behind her was not applause. It was the frantic, chaotic buzz of hundreds of people, all talking at once, the cacophony of an empire collapsing in real time. Rebecca didn't stay to watch the full implosion. She walked off the stage through the velvet-draped wings and into the starkly lit service corridor behind the ballroom. The frantic, chaotic buzz of 1,000 conversations, a sound like a hornet's nest being struck, was abruptly muffled as a heavy door swung shut behind her. The sudden quiet was deafening. She was alone in a hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and heated plates, the clicks of her pumps echoing off the linoleum floors. The icy calm that had armored her on stage remained a protective shell around her heart. She didn't feel the giddy rush of triumph she might have expected. Instead, a profound and complete sense of release washed over her, a feeling so vast it was almost disorienting. It was the feeling of a prisoner stepping into the sunlight after years in the dark, blinking against the brightness of an unknown future. The massive weight of her marriage, the pretense, the silent suffering, the carefully managed appearances had been lifted from her soul, and the lightness left her feeling strangely untethered. She navigated the labyrinthine backstage corridors, from memory emerging not at the grand entrance, but at a discreet side door. The cool night air hit her face, a welcome shock to her senses. It felt cleaner out here, untainted by the recycled air and suffocating perfume of the life she had just detonated. The valet, a young man named Carlos, saw her, and his eyes widened in recognition. He had seen her leave in disgrace an hour before, and now saw her return, a conquering general leaving the field of battle. He said nothing, simply hurried to retrieve her Range Rover, his professionalism a small welcome anchor in the surreal current of the night. The drive back to Park Avenue was a dreamlike journey through the glittering canyons of Manhattan. The city lights, which for so long had felt like the bars of her gilded cage, now looked different. They weren't a backdrop to a life of quiet desperation. They were a network of possibilities, a constellation of futures waiting to be claimed. Her hands were steady on the wheel. There were no tears, no last-minute pangs of regret for the man she had once loved. The grief for her marriage had been a long, slow, private process conducted in the silent hours of the night for months. Tonight was not about mourning. It was about amputation, a clean cut to save the rest of the body. Back in the cavernous, silent penthouse, the opulence felt foreign, like a museum exhibit of a life that was no longer hers. She ignored the emerald gown, still pooled on her dressing room floor, a shed snakeskin from a former self. She walked into the kitchen, her movements deliberate, and made herself a cup of chamomile tea, the simple grounding ritual, a counterpoint to the magnificent chaos she had unleashed. With the warm mug in her hands, she finally allowed herself to look. She sat on a minimalist sofa, opened her laptop, and typed PCOS Capital into the search bar. The internet was on fire. Her calculated presentation had been more effective than a screaming match ever could have been. It had struck at the heart of Walter's world, his reputation and his money. PCOS downfall and #Galagate were the top 2 trending topics worldwide. News sites had already published preliminary articles, their headlines screaming betrayal and corporate malfeasance. The articles were filled with blurry cell phone pictures taken by guests. Walter's face ashen and slack-jawed, Cassandra stumbling for an exit, her white dress stark against the mob of reporters, her expression one of pure, hunted terror. Rebecca scrolled through the commentary, a detached observer, watching the demolition of her own past. She felt a grim surgical satisfaction. It wasn't glee. It was the feeling of a surgeon who has successfully and cleanly excised a malignant tumor. The procedure was brutal, but it was necessary for survival. As she had predicted, the board of directors acted with the swift, merciless pragmatism of men protecting their own fortunes. The warning shot email she'd sent had ensured they were watching the live stream, and her on-stage presentation had given them the public justification they needed to act decisively. Before the sun rose over the East River, an emergency teleconference had been convened. By 9:05 a.m., a formal press release was distributed across every major financial newswire. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control. The board of directors of PCOS Capital announces the immediate termination of employment for CEO Walter PCOS and Head of Communications Cassandra Riley. An internal review has confirmed gross misconduct, including the misappropriation of company assets and actions resulting in significant reputational harm to the firm. Pursuant to the executive morality clause in their employment contracts, their termination is for cause. An interim CEO has been appointed, and the board is committed to upholding the highest standards of ethics and integrity as we move forward. For cause. 2 simple words that constituted a financial execution. It meant Walter was stripped of everything: his multi-million-dollar severance package, his unvested stock options worth a fortune, his annual bonus. The morality clause she had insisted upon a decade ago, a clause he had likely forgotten existed, had become the instrument of his undoing. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers and logistics. Ms. Albright handled the divorce with the ruthless efficiency of an apex predator. Faced with irrefutable, publicly documented proof of both infidelity and financial fraud, Walter's legal team had no ground to stand on. He was a pariah in the city he once ruled. Friends and colleagues shunned him. He was forced to sell the penthouse and its contents to cover his staggering legal fees and the inevitable SEC fines that followed. Cassandra Riley simply vanished, blacklisted from any reputable firm in finance or communications, hounded by the tabloid press and buried under a mountain of debt. She disappeared from the glittering world she had so desperately tried to conquer. She became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties about the price of ambition untethered from conscience. Rebecca, however, refused to be defined by the wreckage. She methodically dismantled her old life, packing only the things that were truly hers: her books, her art, a few pieces of jewelry from her mother. The rest, the furniture, the designer clothes, the symbols of the PCOS empire she left behind, without a second thought. During this time, she was quietly building her future. She had already secured seed funding from a discerning private equity manager, a woman who had been a guest at the gala and had watched Rebecca's performance with a mixture of shock and profound admiration. Anyone who can conduct a hostile takeover that gracefully on a live stage, she had told Rebecca over coffee, is someone I want to invest in. 2 months after that fateful night, a press release of a different kind was issued. It announced the launch of a new firm in a sleek office building in Midtown Veritas Consulting Group. Veritas, the Latin word for truth. Headed by President and CEO Rebecca Picos. The firm's mission was clear: to specialize in corporate governance, ethical crisis management, and strategic communications. Her first clients were a who's who of former Picos capital investors and board members, all eager to align themselves with the woman who had become the city's new icon of integrity. Her new office was the antithesis of her old life. Instead of plush carpets and dark mahogany, it was all clean lines, glass, and brushed steel. It was a space designed for work and command, not for show. Her window didn't overlook the residential quiet of Park Avenue. It faced south towards the chaotic, beating heart of Wall Street. One crisp autumn afternoon, she stood at that window, not with a flute of untouched champagne, but with a mug of strong black coffee cupped in her hands. The city sprawled before her, an urban landscape of infinite challenge and opportunity. She was no longer a co-chair, a co-architect, or a silent partner. She was the founder, the CEO, the sole architect of her destiny. The name Picos was no longer a brand she served, but a name she was redefining on her own terms. The past was a part of her story, a scar that proved she had fought a battle and survived. But it did not define her. In the quiet hum of her new office, surrounded by the foundations of a future she was building for herself, Rebecca Picos was finally truly free. And that's the incredible story of how Rebecca Picos turned her deepest betrayal into her greatest victory. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most observant, and that true strength isn't about avoiding the storm, but about learning how to pilot the ship right through the heart of it. Rebecca's story isn't just about revenge. It's about strategic brilliance, personal integrity, and the courage to rewrite your own narrative even when someone else is trying to burn the pages. What did you think of her master plan? Was it a stroke of genius or a step too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic justice, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of drama, intrigue, and ultimate vindication. Thanks for listening. He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence. Like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals, Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank suspecting fraud or an administrative error. But the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something?" Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously, and that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. "Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage." Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. "What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous?" Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. "She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. "This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal." Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. "I'll handle everything in the meantime." That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. "Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable." Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out, to expose Ava for the home wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning. Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly. The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records, Elizabeth had an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her key card didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. "Jordan's not here," Ava said icily. "You should call next time." Elizabeth's heart hammered. "This is my home. Get out of my way," she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. "He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled." Ava sneered. "I have every right to ask you to leave." Elizabeth was trembling with fury. "You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife." With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. "Jordan left these for you," she said. "He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave." Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. "I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage." Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs, Marcus warned. But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal. It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple: attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. "You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out," Michelle warned. "He'll try to discredit you in front of the board." Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. "You're not supposed to be here," Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. "I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting." Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. "Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders." "I am a serious stakeholder," Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. "I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation." Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. "Ms. Alberts, I presume?" Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. You have no idea what you're getting into. But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. "I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing," she began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. "We should keep personal matters out of board discussions," she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. "These changes aren't just personal," Elizabeth said. "They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust, making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe, demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust." A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. "Jordan, is this true?" Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. "This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds." "She's not," Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. "If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter." Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. "I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain." Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. "I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Miss Monroe, please step into my office." Jordan inhaled, frustration etched across his features. But he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. "Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership." Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest, to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. "Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud." Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. "You can't shut me down like this," he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. "I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation." Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. "I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan." Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him. but he shrugged her off. "You'll regret this," he warned Hartridge, then turned to Elizabeth. "And you made a fool of me in front of everyone." Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. "You did that to yourself," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Hartridge said. "I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain, but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, they offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team." Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. "I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Monroe for a while, and some red flags have come up." Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. "You're investigating her?" A slow exhale from the other end. "Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas." Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. "We want to bring her down, But we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that. Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. Isn't that something your legal team handles? A rueful laugh. Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill two birds with one stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce. Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. I'll do what I can, Elizabeth replied cautiously. But how do I communicate with you about this? Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. And one more thing, Elizabeth Patricia said, before hanging up. People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful. Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old emails messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. Keep digging, she urged, and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details. Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. That's strange, Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. Why would he agree so easily? Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board. But Michelle wasn't convinced. I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know. The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. We need to talk, face to face. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half smile, which Elizabeth did not return. Liz? He began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. You think? He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle. Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. Amicably. Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture? Jordan's shoulders tensed. This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney. She's manipulative, Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. Regardless, I'm willing to compromise. But I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued, "You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave, a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her, calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband." Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. "We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play," Gregory continued. "The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, "We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes, if it comes to that." Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. "This is preposterous," she began. "We demand to see your proof." Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. "Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing, but this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime, and if Ms. Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated." Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. "This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation." Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. "Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet." Ava whirled on Elizabeth. "You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me." Elizabeth's blood boiled. "We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours." A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. "Jordan, I need answers. Were you aware of these trades?" Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed, Ava said it was all above board. that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully, she warned. We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents. The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisors. Have we sent this to the SEC? Not yet, the advisor responded. We wanted to confront them first. Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars, Hartridge asked. And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation. Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby, he announced quietly. Thank you, Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. I believe we might need you. Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust. Hartridge's face remained stony. I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability. Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on. Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability. Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. Stand down, sir, the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. Let him go. This is a private matter. Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises. Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't do that. I'm on the board. Not anymore, Hartridge said grimly. I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Monroe with you. A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming specter of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her. You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won. But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, Miss Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure." Elizabeth gave him a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your fairness." She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him. She thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Monroe. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership, yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. But Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. "They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. "They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature," Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines: Jordan Alberts indicted for insider trading, fraud, and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. "I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life." Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future. If you found this story gripping, insightful, or inspiring, we invite you to be a part of our community. Like this video, share it with friends who need a reminder that courage can emerge from chaos, and subscribe for more real-life drama and empowering tales. Let Elizabeth's story serve as a beacon, no matter how ruthless the betrayal. There's always a path to reclaim your power and build a brighter tomorrow. You too can rise like a phoenix.